Sorry we were a little late this morning, but we want to thank you for being with us again on this. Is today Wednesday? Today's Wednesday, right?
Wednesday,
Yes. Oh
all
my
day.
goodness. Yes. Today, Wednesday, the 22nd of September. Again, this is a continuation of the week-long programs that the South Coast Interfaith Council is having per the Long Beach Gives Initiative, which is a week of giving, giving specifically to nonprofits that are located in the Long Beach area, but certainly serve Long Beach and other areas as well. So this morning, without further ado, we have the continuation of the morning meditation slash scriptural reflections from various faith communities. Yesterday we had Quran recitation from a young woman. Today we have we're representing or talking about the Christian faith, which we realize is a broad spectrum. So Pastor Steve, you're going to represent like a couple of million people and the entirety of Christianity. So no pressure, no big deal, but with us we have Pastor Steve Wilson, who is a board member of the Interfaith Council, as well as the pastor of Pacific Unitarian Church. And so without further ado, I hand it over to you. Steve, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Other than I'm sitting in front of a Starbucks, I'm fine.
Yeah, your church is having some construction, huh? Or
There,
some
yeah, we're
tree.
taking down a tree.
Oh, okay.
We got nice views, so the neighbors want to keep their views. So we have tree work done a lot.
I see. I see. All right. Well,
All right.
it's
Well, thanks.
yeah.
Clearly, the slightly largest religion in the world is best represented by Pastor Steve Wilson. There is no question about that.
And those who know Steve know why we're chuckling when we say that.
Right. I immediately, I was asked just yesterday to do this, and I immediately thought of the Beatitudes. They're sort of this kind of great accessible blessings from Jesus, and they're also thought to be among scholars think of them as some of the most authentic things they said. When the people think about who had other writers writing for Jesus or editors or other voices in there, people tend to gravitate towards the Beatitudes as being among the most authentic, which is beautiful, and they're beautiful in their own way. So there's two versions of them. I'm gonna in a second ask us to close our eyes, and I'm just gonna read through them. One of them comes from Matthew, and one of them comes from Luke. And Matthew and Luke are written sometime around 40 years after Jesus' death, 50 realistically, probably, and they're somewhat contemporaries. Matthew is speaking to a largely Jewish audience. His gospel writers, gospels were good news, designed, written in the name of someone who was famous. So neither Luke conceivably could have written it. Matthew did not. And but that's too scholarly. Let's just. I'm going to invite you to just close your eyes and just listen to them. I'll read Matthew first. And now when he, Jesus, saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled." Beautiful. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you, they will persecute you. Luke's account Matthew's account was up on a hill, people believe on the north side of in Galilee. And Luke's account is on a flat plateau, a flat place. You'll hear it in a second. And it's people think that he might have preached a similar sermon in two different locations. People think the accounts might have been blurred together or interpreted differently. Here's Luke's account. It comes from Luke's chapter 6, 17 through 26. And Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place with a crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and from the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon, who came to hear him and be healed of their diseases, as well as those who were tormented by unclean spirits, and they were healed. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for power went out of him and healed them all. Then he lifted up his eyes toward his disciples and said, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, for when they exclude you and revile you and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for indeed your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner their fathers did to the prophets. But woe unto you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets." And I just picked those sections of them. So it's only in Luke that there is sort of curses as well as blessings, right? Okay. And there is just a sense of Jesus's initial ministry was to areas right around his home. So he was famously from Nazareth, and Capernaum was a town where he started his ministry, and he was sort of stayed away from the city for most of his ministry, really all of it, and sort of preached to the rural areas around, in Judea, sort of mostly north. And, developed a following of people who had basically sort of been on the outs. In his time, there was, in his particular area, there had been a large city developed, and there was a lot of people who, part of the tension that Jesus experiences and draws on for his popularity was a tension between the sort of elite, both of the Jewish people who, a lot of that energy had been that they had conspired with Rome, who was their oppressor, and particularly the temple elite and the temple priests. There's a lot of, if you read the scriptures, there's a lot of energy towards that has been deemed as anti-Semitic, but there's a lot of energy towards the kind of temple priests and the sort of classic clergy who had really allowed themselves to be in connection with Rome in order to do the Jewish rites and in order to keep the temple and to some degree their own power. So I'll stop talking and just let other people share any of their experiences with the Beatitudes, and we can have a little conversation and just think about the beauty and the power of those statements.
Right. And its applicability even now. We were talking yesterday when, and I think that's one of the things that, again, we always, these programs that we do, we're so cognizant of highlighting the fact that there are differences, right? You're a Christian pastor. I'm clearly a Muslim, woman right here. Right. Sure. But at the same time, there's these moral, ethical principles that are that are shared among all these faith traditions, not just even the monotheistic ones, but even beyond that. And we were talking about that yesterday when we were talking the Quranic scriptures about how, these texts, these sacred texts, regardless of what time you're in, you find yourself that it's applicable even in the time that you're in currently. And I think
Sure.
that speaks to the, to the sacredness of it. So, so certainly it's something that we can continuously learn from and benefit from as well. I know Marietta, I don't know, are you able to, let's see if we can hear you. We have Marietta, we have Dawn. Thank you, Dawn, for being part of our family this week. But we would love if you'd have reflections or thoughts, and Kelly
too.
as well. We have Cheryl too. Please feel, we welcome you to this discussion and reflection.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to thank Pastor Steve for sharing the Beatitudes. It is, I think, one of the most beautiful, and as he said, one of the most central things of Jesus' teachings. Just like prophets in general often do, he's turned things upside down. He's just taken things that we would think are conditions to be sorry about, conditions to mourn, conditions to avoid, and turn those into blessings. How in the world can you do that? Can you turn sadness into joy, or poverty into richness, or all these other things that he talks about? But he turns them into blessings, and that's so complex and so hard to understand in a way. It really, if you try to understand it, it pulls you into thinking deeply about these conditions and about what the essence of life really is. What's the purpose of life, and how do we relate to life in this world? I don't know, Pastor Steve, can you give us any enlightenment into why in the world he would turn these things upside down and say people who have wealth and power and so forth are doomed for something not so nice in the future, and people who are suffering right now should be rejoicing in that suffering?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to whether there's a reward in heaven for people. I don't, or that the tables certainly haven't flipped. We still have power, and we still have inequality, and we have all of those things. But Jesus, essentially, also his own, divinity, his own popularity is itself a complete flip, right? For Jewish people, the Messiah would never be crucified, would never have essentially a very practical failed ministry, right? So Christians draw upon this story in a way because Jesus is the unlikeliest hero of all people. Nazareth was a backwater. Jesus was not from a royal family, he likely wasn't from a royal family. He is linked to that in Matthew's gospel. So there, I would question whether the world does flip like that. But clearly, if there's a heaven, the people who most sort of seek that reward are slaves, right? People for who the story of this idea that the way you see things is not the way they really are is, first of all, a fundamental spiritual truth, right? We are obviously living in this practical world, but spiritual gifts are spread here or there, and we all know people who have poor health and no money who are some of the deepest, richest people that we know, right? I mean, that's so. Look at Gandhi. Look at there is not. I mean, the popes generally sort of lose their religious authenticity when they don the garments and all the the wealth. I mean, there's a kind of classic spiritual sort of I mean, even me, you're clergy, you're formal clergy, you're educated. I don't really know where I play in the Beatitudes, right? I make my compromises. I am well paid for what I do, and sometimes when I read Christian scriptures, I wonder where I stand, So, I don't know. I just find them powerful. That's for me. That sort of why it was immediately the first choice.
And
one other thought too, and that is that quite often you mentioned, Pastor Steve, about Jesus being one of the least likely unlikely leaders that you could
Yeah.
imagine because of his
Yeah.
circumstances. But throughout the Jewish scriptures too, we see often the most unlikely person turns out to be the one that God chooses to use to fulfill his will. I mean, Moses didn't want to be a leader, on and on and on.
Right.
All these people who say, no, not me. And yet God chooses the one that seems least likely to be the one to show the way and to interpret what his will is to the people.
Muhammad didn't want that job, right? I mean, he wasn't looking for the fame and fortune. He was recitated to, and for it, is eternally famous and, perhaps a divine prophet, but he didn't necessarily apply for the job either. Right.
Well, Marita, you bring up this point where you're saying like how, all of these faith traditions, they have this emphasis on, I think you said it beautifully, Steve, where, reality isn't always as reality seems to be, right? And that in itself is a spiritual principle right there. And
Sure.
when we talked about, you were saying, how the rich are perhaps doomed to another place or whatnot. But I think one of the things, and Steve, and you can probably, I know you can speak to this better than me from the Christian perspective, but I can say from my study of religion, not just Islam, but the monotheistic faiths and beyond, wealth is considered to be like this test that's given to you, right?
Yes.
And the
Yeah.
thing is that what do you do with that wealth, right? Just because you have the wealth inherently does not make you one that's doomed for destruction, but rather it's almost kind of like, hey, that's a greater test placed on you with wealth than it is with poverty, because with wealth comes a whole litany of other things, right? This notion of at least within the Islamic faith, this notion of like control, right? Like you suddenly feel like, okay, well, I can do it. I have this, I have that, and that kind of distances you from God, and so. But what we find in all the faith traditions is what we do with our wealth, or that encouragement of what we do with it, right? Because within Christian theology, the concept of tithing, right? That's a huge thing. The more you give, the more you get, right? And in Islam, we have this concept of, wealth is ultimately it's God's, right? So you give, and the more you give, there's this constant, these Sufi poets, they used to say it beautifully. There's this constant competition with God to give, right? So God keeps giving me, and I keep on giving it away, and I keep on giving it to others, but then he keeps on giving it back to me. And, it's this constant, like, you know what I mean? So I think that's also important. And that's what faith is, like, it balances, right? So yes, you have the destitute, and it is hard. It's a challenge that's placed upon them. And for that challenge, and for the way that they accept that challenge, or the way that they submit to that challenge, that in itself, grants them mercy from God, right? But also for the wealthy, right? There's a recipe of what you can do, which in turn not only helps them, but then helps the ones who are not so wealthy, helps the destitute. So it's just beautiful how it balances out, right? I mean, and Steve, you can speak more of that from the Christian faith perspective, but
Well, I should say, and I don't need to go down this path, but I myself am not a Christian. I grew up a Christian, and I'm a Unitarian, and I'm all over the place. My theology is
maybe
not that
for those who are out there, maybe you could explain just a little bit. I know we're cognizant of the time, but what others might say, well, Pastor, it says Pastor Steve Wilson. One would automatically think, what does that mean, and how is that particularly within the structure of theology that you can say that, hey, I'm not sure, that I would categorize myself as Christian?
Well, Unitarian Universalist, quite quickly, grew up, we're Protestants in our origins, and then because of scholarship and sort of levels of critical thinking, generally moved to a place where that creedal adherence, or that idea that we were exclusively Christian, has kind of spread. I mean, there's a lot of secular humanists. There's a lot of, sort of like, liberal Jewish people. There's, we're sort of an open-minded faith for people who love questions as much as answers. And I don't want to distract from that's sort of who we are. And, I would say that Jesus is my hero, but I wouldn't call him my savior. So that's sort of where I stand. Like, I mean, he's my first, not only hero. How's that? and and that's so. It's always, I just want to make that clear that I don't want to present myself as something that I'm not. But that idea of with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, there is a necessary. We must inculcate that value in people, right? Otherwise, you have reckless leaders who just believe that they've done it all on their own. And as we get towards Thanksgiving, and you think about, I always sort of try to preach a sermon on, think about what you've earned, because you've earned stuff in your life, and think about what you've been given. And when you really think about that, the basis we stand upon, be it God or be it just natural resources, right? They're given, right? Your ability to digest food well. Anytime you're sick, or like, hold your breath for 45 seconds and you realize how helpful your money is. And I think that the fact that we rest on an earth, and maybe perhaps from God, in a universe where nearly everything we have that's of value is a given or a part of a network of people who make your food, right? There's hands that pick it, and we all know this. It's just really helpful to get your ego out of the way. And I think the Beatitudes are an uplift to those who probably need one, and it's a challenge to those who sit in some level of privilege. And in racial conversations these days, we're having that very conversation again, right? We're having the conversation about maybe everything you think you earned was rested on maybe a racial awareness that you might want to take another look at if you're going to be a fully formed moral human being. There's a lot of privilege that comes with every person of privilege, usually, that you tend not to want to look at.
Right.
You tend to want to think you've achieved it yourself, which, to some degree you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the essence of that spirituality as well, right? Like, to think deeper about what you have, and contemplate on that, and then recognize that perhaps it's not, again, it goes to that reality isn't always as reality seems to be, right? That it's something that either you're given or you're blessed with, and to reflect on that and to grow in your faith in that. I think that summarizes it beautifully. Marietta, do you have any other reflections that you'd like to? Both of you are in your cars, so I appreciate.
I just want to make sure everybody feels the chance. Cheryl, Kelly, Dawn, anyone?
Kelly, Dawn, Harold, Cheryl.
It was more of a discussion than a meditation, I guess.
No worries, Steve.
Well,
hi, Dawn. Hi, Cheryl. Yes.
Hi. I'd just like to say something, because I saw a play over the weekend that based on one of my very favorite books by C.S. Lewis. It's called The Great Divorce. Mm-hmm. And it's not a divorce in the marital sense. It's the what we do to put ourselves between us and God or heaven. It's the pride, the control, like you were saying, all of these things in the Beatitudes that Pastor C was talking about, in the Luke version, all the kind of punishments sort of thing, but it's not really necessarily God's punishments or their natural consequences of not living as God's, according to, Christ's attributes, being patient and loving and compassionate and humble and forgiving and, all of these attributes. If you don't live by those attributes, there are consequences that happen. And, it's, anyways, I highly recommend the book, The Great Divorce, because C.S. Lewis was a Christian author, but the concepts are very applicable to, any faith and how to live our lives. And that, when we when we don't embrace these attributes in our lives, we become very small. And I think of the word damnation, we stop ourselves, right? I mean, that's what the word damnation is. We stop ourselves from progressing to become what we could fully become. I just want to add.
Rumi has. Okay, sorry.
No, that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Rumi has this great quote where he says that when you do something from your ego, you sort of drain your potency and your power, but when you do something from the holy, you sort of tap into an eternal. I don't have the quote in my head, but he sort of says when you do something from spirit, you know what I mean? Like it's sort of renewing, and you can just feel it. I mean, you feel it in your own body. Like when you are compassionate, it feels good. And I think that we, as a culture and a people, it's funny how it reacts. Like you could put a picture of a three-legged dog up on, Fund Me and raise $15,000 because we can sort of feel good about that. It touches our compassionate heartstrings. And yet in other ways that are much more impactful, we don't. And, that I always think that's an interesting moral test and a moral sort of like, I feel like we have almost sometimes some old-fashioned morality about what's important and what's not. I don't know. That's down a whole different path, but
Steve, you're good with that. We feel like we almost got there, and then Steve's like, "Oh, let me just introduce something else, and we'll go down another path." Right? So that's
right.
good,
Yeah.
good, great things.
That's my job.
That's your job. There you go.
Yeah,
Don,
right.
Don, did you have something to share? Don, welcome, Don.
Yes, I think it'd be great to have more discussions like this, and a lot of this probably is accepted by you, Nelia, and other faith groups, and which parts aren't and why. Anyway, in my mind, everything is spiritual, and this is contrasting the spiritual versus the ways of man that are kind of like universal 2,000 years ago or now, and then our job is to see that spirituality in everything we do. It's part of our religion, as a matter of fact, and to have that higher vision of cause and effect, like God is not punishing us as much as was alluded before. It's the consequences of things that he knows about. There are laws. If you do this, this is the consequence. And God's not doing it. That's just the consequence. And
right.
So I think we need to constantly, be rebels in a way, and not just go along with the crowd, the stream of humanity that this fad comes up and that fad, but they're universal themes by physical animals, and rise above that and see what's truly important in our lives and do those things. Like in our church, the family is paramount, and loving one another, relationships, and that's more important than like making money for whatever or whatever. So it's a good thing to we got to shake up our thoughts once in a while and say, what does that really mean, and how am I dealing with this, and what's truly important and what isn't. So that's a few of my ideas. I haven't put them together, but I really would love to have more time to talk about it. An issue like this, a particular scripture that's shared, like the Golden Rule, shared by everybody. Might be nice to have a discussion on that with everybody.
I can't promise you that I can fit it in this week, Don, but we'll certainly work on. I have a little notebook in which I always jot down ideas that I hear from people or suggestions that people give us. So I will definitely note that down. And and you're right. I think it's a big focus on, if we focus on these things that are these moral precepts, then what a world it would be, right? Regardless of what organized religion or non-religion that you might be a part of, because it's that thread of commonality that connects us and as human beings. And so you're absolutely right. Kelly, I want to welcome Kelly, Harold. If you guys have anything to share, please feel free to do so. But please don't feel compelled. There's no compulsion in religion either. So yes.
I just want to say thanks, Steve, for sharing that. I don't know why, but it hits me. Thank you too for saying, you know, religion or non-religion that you belong to, because I'm sitting here listening to people within seeming structures of your religious organizations, and I consider myself an atheist, but very spiritual. And, you know, I listen, and my response to, you know, all of these suggestions is that's just how you're supposed to be. You know, that's just who you're supposed to be. And that's kind of where I work from. And I don't know, the extra layer is interesting to hear, and to know that most of you have the same thoughts in a different way.
Right.
Well, that is what the interfaith, I mean, we wouldn't do it if we would all get together and disagree. Right? I mean, there is a general ethos that there's some common ground among the faiths, and here's the deeper truth is that we don't really all practice our individual faiths anymore. I mean, the world is so plural that, you know, I know Cheryl comes from the Latter-day Saints tradition, Neela's from the Islamic tradition, right? From the Christian tradition, a Unitarian. Because we are all together, we're really sort of nomadic, and in a way we're kind of our own unique thing in an interfaith context. And so much of our faiths were born in some version of isolation, right? I mean, they were in contact with us, but they mostly sort of foster themselves in private ways. And I just wonder what, I have as much respect for the Dalai Lama as I do for Thoreau, or, and I have as much respect for Gandhi and, Rumi they're all, to me, like sort of, I don't know. I mean, I think we're more pluralistic than we let on. I just do, and we all share stories of different faith traditions all over the place now. Right. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if that gets discussed enough.
Well, Kelly, and
I think we're all a little nomadic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Kelly, you bring up this important point, and I think it's something that as a board and as an organization, we've always talked about this, and it comes up more and more, this concept of spiritual but not religious, right? What does that mean? What is, quote unquote religious? What is quote unquote spiritual? And who defines that, right? Like, is there a standard definition, in fact? And if it is, who owns that definition? And so, I mean, these are questions of discussion, right? And I think, I remember when I was in grad school, it was really interesting, this concept of atheism, as a faith, right? And blew my mind. I was like, wait, what? And it still does, because again, I think one of the things as people, bringing it back to kind of like the council, one of the things that we pride ourselves in is understanding that there's so much more to understand, right? And so that and being open to that, and not feeling like our own faith is somehow being compromised because we're open to that. And I think that's one of the things, and I'm going to plug in my computer while I'm talking because the battery is going to die. But I think that's one of the things that we like to highlight per the council, is that one of the things that makes us unique as individuals, I think part of this organization is we're not saying that clearly I'm a devout Muslim. I have a scarf on my head, woke up at 5 o'clock this morning to do my morning prayers. My phone's going to go off with the adhan in a couple of hours for my afternoon prayers, going to do my, things like that. But at the same time, I think it's, what this council is about is honoring those individuals who espouse to a certain faith, and then finding the commonality that exists among us, right? And then now this discussion of those, well, what about those who don't necessarily have or ascribe to an organized faith? What does that mean? And that's a discussion that we've been having a lot more. And I think as we look into the future, because we can't negate the world that we live in as well, right? And so, these are, I think, what makes this council so special is that it provides a safe place to have those discussions without feeling like someone is being threatened, or without feeling that like you are being threatened. And I think the reason that happens is we all agree on the fact that we honor each other as human beings, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that's very, for someone, we have to be conscious of the time, but as someone who grew up in the Midwest, in the Bible Belt of America, who's lived in the East Coast, and Steve, I know you're from the East Coast as well, you know, who kind of migrated throughout the United States and landed herself in Southern California, it's a very unique place to be in that regards. And I think having organizations, not just of the South Coast Interfaith Council, but you have the Orange County Interfaith Network, Don is a member of that, you have all these other places where it's a unique setting where it's a safe place to have these discussions without A, feeling threatened yourself, or B, being threatening to someone else, you know. And I think the root of that is respect. The root of that is that humanity that ties us together. And that's something that we want to celebrate. So so I think, it's 9:40. Well, Steve, thank you. I don't know if you want to end us with any parting thoughts or prayers or anything before I kind of give another synopsis of what's yet to come.
I guess I would just, encourage us all, including myself, to sort of return to those core principles of Dawn was saying, sort of what's true. And I thought, I tend to like to think of who do I want to be when I'm, just about to die, and what do I want to have done, and that sort of helps guide me. And I think the Beatitudes, and just sort of being more of those things, right? Being more spiritual, being more compassionate, like that's the standard I set for myself, and that is sort of more universally spiritual than it is any one particular tradition. And I think I just think that's cool.
That is cool. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you for being part of this, and thank you for being in your car and doing this. We appreciate that. Thank you, Don, for being with us. You've been with us almost every program almost, so we appreciate that. And Harold, I know you're here as well, and of course Cheryl. And before I kind of conclude for this morning, I think Cheryl will pull up that flyer again if we could, and go through the rest of what we have. So we are on Wednesday. We've finished. This is our 7th program that we've finished, which is great. What's coming up is at noon, we're going to have another lunch session, Food and Faith, and this time we're going to have lunch with Cantor Elon Davidson. Yesterday we had lunch with Rini Ghosh. Steve was part of that as well. And so today, and I think he's going to make some hummus. And while he makes hummus, we'll talk a bit about the Jewish faith and how our faiths connect us together, right? And then this evening we'll continue with our Hope Through Music, an evening of song and dance. And then tomorrow morning, we'll have some spirituality practices from the Native American faith traditions. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll have the return of the dinosaurs while they hit the streets of Long Beach. And so join us to find out what that's all about. That's from at noon tomorrow. And then tomorrow night is actually one of our monthly programs that we do, the Religion 101 series, and it falls on the 4th Thursday of every month, and that is tomorrow. So there'll be Reverend Elena Larson, who will be speaking to us about the Congregational Church, the United Church of Christ. And then Friday is our concluding programs. In the morning, we'll have spirituality and a little meditation from the Buddhist faith, and then we'll wind down and rewind and recap and reflect, and hopefully a chance to where the greater community can meet the rest of the SCIC board, and we'll just kind of have a time for reflection together. And again, these all are in due to us asking for support to continue programs like this, particularly through the Long Beach Gives Initiative, which is a week of giving. So we encourage you, if you're able to please donate to us. You can go to the Long Beach Gives page and find SCIC on there so that we can continue discussions and programs like this. So thank you, Steve, thank you, Kelly, Cheryl, thank you, Dawn, Harold, Marietta, and all of you out there in the virtual world for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you in a few hours at 12 when we will cook with Cantor Elon Davidson. So thank you so much. Have a good rest of the morning, and we'll see you in just a little bit. Take care. And don't forget to
Same here.
donate. All right. Thank you, Steve. Thanks.